This is an example of developer commentary. We want to give you as much freedom as possible so you can noodle around and play the game while commentary is active. You can enable and disable subtitles in the commentary menu or using this switch up here. You can stop commentary at any time by reactivating this commentary node or through the menu. From time to time, we show recordings of gameplay in order to illustrate the conversation. By default, these appear up in the corner of the screen, but if you desire, you can toggle them to full screen to see things better. When you do that, the game is paused. You can shrink the recording again to resume your own gameplay. We just did this automatically, but we'll let this recording go on for a while so you can try maximizing and minimizing for yourself. Often there will be illustrations which are treated the same way. You can maximize them for best visibility or minimize them if you just want to play the game. When a commentary is done and you go on to the next one, the new illustrations appear in whichever mode you left the last commentary, maximized or minimized. This is an example of developer commentary menu, or we show when you do that, you can maximize them for best visibility or minimize them if you just or minimized. We've touched up the graphics and sound for this edition of Braid, but if you want to play with the original graphics and sound, you can switch at any time. These are the old graphics, and these are the new graphics. The commentary world is all new, so there are no old graphics to switch to when you're back there. It only works here in the main game. These are excerpts from an interview by Mark Tenbosch. Mark has been a friend of mine for quite a number of years now. I met him when he first started working on his four-dimensional game Miega Kure, which he is still working on. He's one of the few people who really understands it. So I'm thinking of like the beginning. These are Kure, which he is still working on. He's one of the few people who really understands the kind of design that I do at a deep level, so it was an interesting conversation.
All right, so the thing that struck me the most when I played Braid was how minimalistic the puzzle design felt. And I think that was like sort of the thing that blew me away the most, maybe, I want to say. And I was wondering if you had more thoughts on that. I've sort of heard you talk about it a little bit, but maybe we can go deeper there.
That's a direction that I went more in over time that I kind of discovered while I was working on the game. There definitely was more complex level geometry in the beginning and more monsters and stuff. I think one idea that I had early on was I want levels to fit on one screen so that they're framed, like whenever possible. Like sometimes it'll be fun to have bigger levels, but if everything fits on one screen and you're thinking about a hard puzzle, you can see all the elements right there, and you're taking away some artificial difficulty and you get to the essence of the puzzle, right? Good puzzles are going to be things where you can see all the information, And that means they're not that complicated. And I had played puzzle games where the reason the puzzle was hard is because you have to do 17 things in the right order or whatever. And I was like, no, that's not this game, because this game should be about time. Because I'd been doing experimental gameplay workshop, I had this idea that every puzzle should be on theme for the particular world. And so if something is on theme, how complicated can it be? Because if there's some specific idea about it, if that idea only takes place in one part of the puzzle, what's the rest of the puzzle doing? It's kind of dead weight on that. Unless the idea happens multiple times to like fill out, but that's hard. It's like a lot harder to design one idea taking place in multiple ways. We actually do that on the new game a little bit, and actually Zach is really good at that. He's maybe the best person I've ever seen at that particular thing. So I think that gravitated towards simpler, maybe. Also, just sometimes I would be working on a puzzle and I would be unhappy with it because it looks ugly, or just this thing is weird, and then I would delete the thing that was weird and I would like it more. And I kept seeing that trend. I was like, okay, this game is better when I'm more minimal. But that was only something that I really had clarity about, I would say, by the middle or 2/3 of the way through development, for sure.
All right, so and I thought that puzzle is doing the
So then there's this underground puzzle. So here we have rewinding keys and non-rewinding keys, and rewinding locks and non-rewinding locks. And the first puzzle is, okay, I get it. I have a rewindable key and a non-rewindable lock, and that means I get to use the key twice. That's really cool, right? And then you go down here and you're like, oh, there's a good old-fashioned rewindable key, and okay, so should I do the same thing? And okay, let's do that again, the greedy strategy, and that seems fine. And okay, well, there must be another key down here, and we go down there, and okay, great, this is easy, no problem, I know exactly what to do. And then you go back over here and you're like, great, I need to rewind to do that again, and wait, oh, darn, that key isn't rewindable. I didn't get it back. It's not infinitely hard, this puzzle, but again, you have to turn things around a little bit in your mind. Remember how I said before, oh, like the sparkly greenish gold key, that's the super wonderful key because you can get it out of pits. But actually here we realize, oh, that's not always the more useful, more powerful key, because you can't get it back. So the things that are immune are also the things that you can't get back. And that was really interesting to me, and we'll say more about that on the next level.
Yeah. One more thing to say about this one. When I first designed it, right, the idea to do, well, it's much like the level phase or a few other levels where we have a simpler version of a problem that's not supposed to be that hard.
Right.
It's supposed to be cool and introduce you to the idea and just show this new phenomenon, right?
Right.
So we have the easier version and then the harder version. It's got one extra gate, one extra key. Or maybe you don't even notice the extra key at first, right? Because it's way off down in the pit. And I arrived at this, I think, a little bit by trial and error. I was like, what can I do that's like harder and stuff? And then after I made it, I realized the harder puzzle is reducible to the simpler puzzle after one move. But almost
right
nobody
first
ever
move.
premeditates. Yes.
Yeah.
And the right first move okay. There's misdirection here in the sense that we give you the wrong key first, and obviously, and in fact, when I give you the wrong key, you haven't even seen the other key. But usually people are just going to start making progress on the puzzle. So they open
Right, exactly.
the first gate that they can use with the key that they can see, and then they start looking around, like what's down the ladder. Oh, there's another key. Great, right? And so it's set up to encourage people to do it wrong. And I mean, maybe through some freak chance, some very small number of people do this right the first time, but I doubt it. Right? It's one of these things in the game where we really encourage you to get here and get stuck, right? And then look at the thing and say, wait, there's more gates than keys.
I was stuck
Yeah.
here for a long time. I was like making up theorems and proofs. Like I can prove that this puzzle is impossible because this key can only get through that gate, and then but if I try to get the key back, I close that gate again, blah blah blah, and in the end the solution is not, it's not like a ton of moves or something, but it is a deliberately non-intuitive order. Of course, in principle, you could make if you have a rewindable key, you could go through as many sparkly gates as you wanted, and you could probably make diabolical combinatorial puzzles with like sets of keys and sequences of gates and God only knows what, and it's probably NP complete and so on. But, this was a very nice taste of you sometimes have to follow a different branch than the one that made the most sense at first.
Yeah. And I do think, like, this is very clearly something that this game doesn't do, what you just mentioned about making ever more complex, piled up puzzles.
Right. They don't get bigger, which
Yeah.
is, I think that's good, because some puzzle games, they just get bigger.
Well, I think, what the game is after is to communicate the ideas, right? And after this second one, that was all the cool idea that I had at the time as the designer of this. And after that's done being communicated, like giving you more puzzles is not necessarily, like, that's filler, right? But it's not really good, right? And so while making this game, I started to learn this aesthetic that it's not exactly a minimalist aesthetic. I think that's the wrong word, but it's right sizing things, right? It's like what's interesting, focus on that.
And then avoid the bunnies.
And I thought that puzzle is doing a thing that is very common, I think, in puzzle design, where you in a pit you've done wrong.
Right. You can, okay, you're supposed, it's like find the key or whatever. It's like wrong key, but this is still savable, right? It's just a rewindable key and a rewindable gate key. Interesting starting box of the key matter, but that's not a situation that the only place I think that really like preemptively that obviously you use this, and the gate's going to fail, but people usually fail anyway. And I where obviously the other this is you
And I thought that puzzle is doing.
So you have speed runs and you have challenge times.
Yeah.
How did you come up with those times?
I played them myself and saw how fast I could go, and then I made the times like easier than I could do by some percent.
Okay.
Because I figure, like, look, as a developer, you're really good at the game from playing it all the time. You can't, like, in order to pass a challenge meant for a lot of people, you can't expect them to be as good as you because you're sitting there in front of the game all the time, right? Simultaneously, the best person in the world will probably be better than you because they'll spend all the time grinding on it. And so you just want to keep that in mind, and you want to pick something that's pretty reasonable. Now, there was one additional, well, okay. So it's not just about what are the times. At the very first level of World 2, there's a few tutorial-ish things that are just like, here's some puzzle pieces that are kind of easy, that you do various things to get, just to show you the kind of things you do in this game, right? One of the very first ones was, here's one of these platforms that goes, I don't know if this was in the version that you guys play, it might have been.
You mean the first, like, alpha build?
Yeah.
Okay.
There was like a platform, you know, at the very end of what I'm about to say, there's a puzzle piece that you can see, and you're like, I need to get that.
Okay.
So there's a platform with a gap you have to jump across
Right.
to a narrower platform.
Right.
With another gap to a narrower platform,
Right,
with
yeah.
another gap to
Yeah.
a narrower platform, with another gap, and there's like 9 platforms increasingly narrow, and like
Right.
the last ones are
Right.
absurdly thin compared to your character.
Yes.
Which is kind of bad because like even at that point, it's like you would stand on a platform or not based on whether the center point of your character was
Right.
located on the span of the platform, right?
Right.
So it's like, are you supposed to read the game's mind there? But that was like funny because there's no way you would do that in another game.
Right. Right.
That ended up getting taken out. In part, like Microsoft complained about it, but I was also like, yeah, that's been in the game since really early on, and it's no longer quite the quality of experience that I want to have.
Microsoft complained about it?
They did a thing, so in early 2008, when the game was
Okay.
getting close to kind of being done,
Okay.
they did a whole frickin' playtest lab thing about it, right?
Oh, okay.
And they decided to tell me, here is how you should change your game based on the results of the playtest lab. And I
Okay.
said, well, this would make more sense if I could see the raw data. And they were like, no, we're not going to send you any data. I, as the producer, am just going to give you my opinion about what you should do. And I was
Wow,
like,
right.
no.
Okay.
But I did change that one thing because it was like, you know, sometimes you already kind of know something's not that good, and it's like, all right.
Yeah.
Yeah. One problem that I see sometimes with Hunt is that people get up to the platform on the left here, and they've already killed the monster below as expected, so there's no visual sign of the right way to get across to the right. But there's a monster here on the platform with them, or if they killed it already, as soon as they rewind, that monster is the first one resurrected. So a player might spend a long time trying to bounce off of this monster as it walks over to the right side of the platform. because it's the only obvious possibility for solving the puzzle. The jump doesn't come anywhere close to getting you across, and you do bump your head on the ceiling for reasons explained here. So this approach can't work, but a player is likely to try several times, frustratingly, before trying something else, because there simply is no visual cue of any other way up there. Maybe that's fine. I thought so at the time. Hey, it's a hard puzzle, let people be a bit stuck. But now I wish I had encouraged players to be stuck in a cleaner way. The cleanest revision to try as a designer might be just to delete this monster so that the platform is empty. This messes up a subtle bit of symmetry of the level, that there's exactly one monster on every walkable surface, but it's probably worth it. But removing this monster would somewhat ruin the World 4 version of Hunt. You could bring back that monster only in World 4, or you could do what I've done here, split this platform so that the monster still exists, but doesn't come anywhere near the gap you need to cross. This removes one major avenue of frustrating wrong attempts, which is maybe good. It makes the level easier, which is maybe bad. If you bounce off this monster's head, starting from somewhere on its own platform, it seems almost like you can reach the platform on the upper right where you're trying to get. Tim's arm gets to about the middle of that platform. As far as I'm concerned, that's a bit too close, and I'd like a way to fix that. We might try to move the platform you're standing on further left, but we can't because you'd have to move it so far that the actual good jump that solves the puzzle becomes impossible or nearly so. You might notice that the third floor of this puzzle is quite expansive compared to the first and second floors, and say, hey, why didn't you just move the third floor upward a bit, shrinking the height of that level and expanding the height of the second floor so the place you're trying to get is clearly too high. But the problem with that is, in the natural process of solving the puzzle, the player will kill the first three monsters and keep trying to jump off the fourth one to cross the gap, and I wanted the player to feel like he has plenty of room to jump around, not bumping his head on the ceiling all the time, because that would make the experience of trying to solve this puzzle more frustrating. Being physically blocked all the time or bumped around when things are already going badly can be mildly rage-inducing. That said, the ceiling right above the gap is a bit lower than the ceiling to its left in order to provide wider puzzle tolerances to make it more obvious that this is not the right solution. So the player does bump his head here, just not very much, and hopefully not in a frustrating way. The top row also needs space because you want enough room for the player to jump and not leave the top of the screen. And the HUD is up there, and it gets awkward if the HUD is covering your gameplay. We could have added more space and caused the screen to scroll vertically, but this level is just much better when you can see the whole thing at once. So, even though I was not happy with how high the player can bounce from this monster, I didn't see any solution that wasn't worse than the problem, so I left it as is. Here is a simpler version of the Mimic distraction puzzle. I did think of this form of puzzle when designing the original game, but I felt it would be too easy to solve accidentally, or, even when solving deliberately, it just wouldn't feel as strong. The aspect of the final design of having to enter a long passage from both sides necessitates more premeditation, and it just feels better to me. But that final design requires special programming to get the rabbit not to leave its area, because if he did go out from beneath the overhang, you could easily just jump on him and kill him. That is to say, this rabbit does not behave quite like the other ones, and the only reason for that is to implement this puzzle. Some designers would consider this a hack that acts as a mild blemish on the game. Here, to prevent the rabbit from being killed, we make the player climb up into a restricted area from which the rabbit cannot leave and cannot be attacked from above. Thus, no special programming hack is required. This initial cliff on the left is here because the rabbit chases you very slowly when you are far away. So, if you were able to wake him up and then walk to the left side of the level, you could coax him to walk all the way over to the left. Then you could successfully race to the ladder and win without using the parallel universe at all. Because that would break the puzzle, we prevent it. Today, with much more design experience, do I like this version of the puzzle better? Probably, as I'm more of a purist about these weird hacks. But there's still something enticing about the symmetry of you and your shadow entering a tunnel from opposite sides, having the rabbit chase you in opposite directions. I wonder if, by working on this further, I could come up with an even better version of this puzzle that retains that symmetry. It's April 2022, and I am here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, with Dr. Chris Moore of the Santa Fe Institute. Or how would you like people to know you?
Hair doctor professor, of course. Or I think it's hair professor doctor, actually.
You do have hair.
I do
Quite
have
long
hair. Yeah,
yes.
thank you.
So we've made some experiments and talked for a while about what's the best way to concretely convey useful information and thoughts about the game. And it seems to work very well to play through the game from beginning to end and just comment on what we see and what we think about it. And really the goal of this conversation is to talk about what Chris likes and thinks is interesting, because I can do what I like later, right, anytime.
Yeah, so we're going to play through the game and focus on my favorite puzzles and like what their structure is, what they're teaching the player, kind of those moments of aha and revelation that the game produces, and how each one teaches you how to use the mechanic, often in a new way. And then I guess we'll use those into...
what I would do was kind of work with one brush a lot of the time, and that changed a bit which one I was using, but I'd work with one brush that was like a round brush with a very simple shape, or maybe like a little bit of texture, a little bit of grain on it, or like sometimes I was using a brush with a canvas texture that a lot of people noticed in the original Braid. I'm using one brush, and well, this is the beginning of the whole project for me. John was looking for an artist to add art to his game, Braid, which was already totally functional and kind of fully designed end to end, although it would change more over time. He was auditioning a lot of artists and sent screenshots of the stripped down programmer art, and my task was to paint over and decide what this might look like.
This puzzle, new in the Anniversary Edition, shows a clear application of excuses. But because I don't want to spoil the puzzle, I'll leave it as an exercise for the player to formulate clearly what these excuses are. I had an idea of an experience that I wanted the A different example of a pattern break that's a lot more subtle in this game is, well, the epilogue that you get to at the end, right? Even the final level before the epilogue is pretty different from what else happens in the game.
Right.
That acts as a break and also just like a dramatic.
I'm having a little bit of a hard time understanding why you described the star puzzles as hard rather than obscure, because to me, like, I don't know that I would necessarily say they were hard in the way that a difficult programming problem is hard.
Well,
Like,
okay.
when you don't even know that something is there, I wouldn't necessarily say that was hard.
But they're both. Okay?
Okay.
So on the one hand, they are obscure. You don't even know where they are. You don't know they exist until you find one.
Yeah.
Some of them are not strictly harder than some puzzles in the game, but other ones very much are. Other ones are very much about going into this territory that I spoke about avoiding before, of having puzzles be relatively longer sequences of things that you have to do. Some of these are like that. So for example, on the level called Elevator Action, on the level called Elevator Action, the entryway that you get to know about the star is a little messy. It's messy enough that I wouldn't have put that in the main game, in that, like, there's just a little bit of dexterity and, like, doing some rewind stuff that has a narrow time window to achieve and has to be executed a little bit precisely. And then that gives you the opportunity to try to get the star. And then the thing that you have to do to get the star is, like, a little bit grindy in the sense that you probably die a lot and mess up a lot, and even figuring out exactly what to do is less crisp than elsewhere in the game, and all these things, right? Another one that I'm thinking of on this level called Fickle Companion, this is World 4, it's just very explicitly a longer sequence of things that you have to do to get to where the star is. And that was intentional. It was like, okay, because these are secret and because these are things that dogged players are going to find, they can be a little more messy. They can be a little bit harder. I can play around with that. And it'll also be what makes them feel different from the rest of the game, right? If you have secret puzzles, but they're like the same as the non-secret puzzles, you know, it's a little bit interesting because they were secret, you had to find them, but it's the same kind of thing. Whereas if they're a little bit different, if they're doing things that are a little bit absurd, so one of the most famous star puzzle, whereas if they're a little bit different, if they're doing things that are a little bit absurd, so one of the most famous star puzzle, right, that people love to complain about,
I'm sure I know what this one is.
it's the one where you have to ride on a cloud for an hour and a half. Actually, no, that's not correct. You have to wait for a cloud for 45 minutes to get to where you can jump on it. And then you have to ride it for another 45 minutes or so to get to the star. That's not that hard, but it's like pushing at the boundaries of the space in a way that is not totally acceptable in polite company.
Yes.
But like when you're hanging out with your buds, you can do more of that stuff, right?
Sure. But that doesn't really answer my question. So just to be more specific, like I said, I was trying to differentiate between hard and obscure. And the reason I'm asking that is because when I asked why these were put in the game, you said you were interested in having a layer of the game that was harder. while I can
Okay.
make up
No,
answers
I
to the,
understand the question.
I can
yeah.
imagine answers to this question, but I want to hear your actual answer, which is, it seems like you also wanted obscurity to be part of it, not just difficulty, because those are different things.
Well, here's what I will say. Like, more challenging and difficult to achieve the full secret thing, like
Mhm.
getting all of them,
Mm-hmm.
was part of the picture from the beginning, right? Which may or may not mean that any specific puzzle is way hard or not, right? So the cloud one isn't that hard, although you do have to figure something out that's kind of subtle with it.
Mm-hmm.
That also, by the way, is pretty tweaky in a way that I wouldn't do. Like, even getting on the cloud is a thing that how it works, I just wouldn't consider acceptable for a regular puzzle in the game.
Right.
And so part of what I'm really doing, it's hard, so I'm taking you on a tour of stuff. If you go into this part of the game, you kind of signed up for it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You signed up for something a little bit outside the normal part of the game. And this
Right.
is where, so sometimes people give hate for this part of the game on the internet or whatever, but it's almost never people who actually found it, right? It's
Right,
like,
right.
oh, I went on the YouTube video that tells me how to get the stars and it's a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
And so your game sucks or whatever, right?
Right.
And
Right.
it doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you find this piece of magic and then you're like, oh my God, where are the other things and how do I do this? You are opting in to this experience that is at the borders of the game, literally and figuratively. Okay, so you're going beyond the regular game a little bit.
Yeah.
So you're signing up for the special forces in some sense.
Yeah.
Right? And so we can do things because you signed up for that we can't do for most people, right? And maybe you're interested in things because you're a little more of a gamer that most people are not interested in. So one dimension of that is harder. But another dimension of that is maybe it's a little more difficult to see the point, which is a different kind of difficulty. It's interpretive difficulty rather than execution difficulty, right? And maybe another one is just, with the long cloud thing, it's like being a little bit more absurd in a way that, like, if that were the first puzzle in the game that everybody had to play, nobody would get to the second puzzle in the game, right?
Right.
But at the end, for people who signed up for it, it's better. And it also just has natural properties that are good, like the fact that there's a cloud sitting there is a big mystery, and the fact that there's a callback to it only understood by some small percentage of people who get through it is pretty cool. It's pretty interesting. So there's some picture like that, right? So when I said harder, it's sort of two different things. It's that the experience itself is more difficult, and I don't expect most people to finish even if they start, but it is also that it's okay for individual puzzles to be harder. Those are correlated, but they're different things. But it also doesn't mean it's necessary for them to be harder.
So if I may mine the answer to my question out of that answer,
I don't know what else to
which
say
is
about
still
this,
an
man.
answer to a different question.
I
I
don't
think
get
you
it.
did answer the question inside there.
Okay.
But I just want to make sure that I'm right
Okay.
about the answer. You said you discover this thing and it's kind of a little magic. It's like, oh, there's this other thing I didn't know about that was in the game. I take it that's really the answer to my question about why obscurity. The answer is because you could have had a door that's like, hardcore Space Marines go through the hardcore Space Marine door and nobody else go through there, right?
Yes.
And that would be another way to have
Well,
it, right?
If
But-
you do that,
Yeah.
it seems more like part of the main game, right? It's like, well, this
Yeah.
is advanced. It says it's advanced,
Yeah.
but it's here. So if I'm really good,
Right.
I should go through the door.
Right.
And it's more part of the normal play experience. So hiding it makes it more exceptional and more extra and more like you don't really have to do this to have a complete experience with
Okay.
the game as a civilian.
Okay. So it's less about, well, it might be partially about making it feel magical to find, but also maybe it's a little bit The Last Starfighter. You've created these secret stars
Yeah.
to find the players who would want to engage with the stars,
Yes.
if you will.
that is not a bad way to think of it.
Okay.
Or similarly, but differently, like, what's the closest thing to an actual good secret society that you could have?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not like you put a big billboard in the center of town, like, come do our
Yes.
wacky rituals in the room or
Right.
whatever, right?
Yeah.
But something like this is like, oh, everybody who knows, I mean, ignoring for a fact that we're unfortunately in this world with YouTube and all that, where you
Right.
can go and spoil it for
So now
yourself.
everyone knows, but
Well, surprisingly, though, not really,
Right,
because, you know, there's a lot of things on YouTube, right?
Right, right.
But yes.
for the
if you-
first 48 hours, those people. Yeah.
Or, I mean, even now, if somebody picks up the game and plays it, they're unlikely to know about this unless they listened explicitly to something that spoiled them on it.
Right.
So it's still intact, I think, the possibility. And
Right.
even back then, you know, the internet was not exactly what it is today, but the internet was wide. The game was distributed internet only. So this
Yeah.
was known to be a property of the internet at release. And
Yep.
it was just like, okay, I'm still going to do the best that I can do within that constraint.